Welcome to Study Kendra. Today we will talk about Class 10, History Chapter 4. The Making of a Global World. The making of the global world has a long history, of trade, of migration, of people in search of work, the movement of capital, and much else. In this chapter we will discuss the phases through which this world in which we live has emerged. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The pre-modern world. Globalization is often referred to as an economic system that has emerged since the last 50 years or so. The making of the global world has a long history of trade, migration of people in search of work, the movement of capital, etc. Silk routes link the world. The name, Silk Routes, points to the importance of westbound Chinese silk cargoes along this route. The Silk Routes are a good example of vibrant pre-modern trade and cultural links between distant parts of the world, linking Asia with Europe and North Africa. Trade and cultural exchange always went hand in hand. The Buddhist preachers, Christian missionaries and Muslim preachers traveled along these routes. Food travels, spaghetti and potato. Traders and travelers introduced new crops to the lands they traveled. Many of our common foods such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, sweet potatoes, and so on were not known to our ancestors until about 5 centuries ago. These foods were only introduced in Europe and Asia after Christopher Columbus discovered America. It is believed that noodles traveled west from China to become spaghetti. Consequences of trade. European sailors found a sea route to Asia and discovered America. Goods, people, customs and knowledge were the few things due to which the Indian subcontinent was famous for in trading. A transformation followed after the discovery of America, due to its abundant lands, minerals and vast land. In Peru and Mexico precious metals were found, especially silver, which helped Europe in financing its trade. Portuguese and Spanish conquest and colonization of America followed, and the weapon used by them was smallpox. It spread deep into the continent, ahead even of any Europeans reaching there. It killed and decimated whole communities, paving way for conquest. The 19th century, 1815 to 1914. Economists identify 3 types of movement or flows within international economic exchanges. The first is the flow of trade, which in the 19th century referred largely to trade in goods, example, cloth or wheat. The second is the flow of labor, the migration of people in search of employment. The third is the movement of capital for short-term or long-term investments over long distances. The world economy takes shape. Due to an increase in population from the late 18th century, the demand for food grains in Britain had increased. The laws allowing the government to do this were commonly known as the Corn Laws. In order to fulfill British demand, in Eastern Europe, Russia, America and Australia, lands were cleared to expand food production. In order to manage linking of railways to agricultural fields and building homes for people required capital and labor. By 1890, a global agricultural economy had taken shape, adapting complex changes in labor movement patterns, capital flows, ecologies and technology. Role of technology in 19th century. Some of the important inventions in the field of technology are the railways, steamships, the telegraph, which transformed the 19th century world. Development of refrigerated ships helped in transportation of frozen meat from America, Australia, New Zealand to different European markets. Britain and France made vast additions to their overseas territories in the late 19th century. Belgium and Germany became new colonial powers. Rinderpest is a fast-spreading cattle plague which hit Africa in the late 1880s. Indian trade, colonialism and the global system. Cottons from India were exported to Europe. In Britain, tariffs were imposed on cloth imports. Consequently, the inflow of fine Indian cotton began to decline. Indigo used for dyeing cloth was another important export for many decades. British manufacturers flooded the Indian market. The value of British exports to India was much higher than the value of British imports from India. Thus, Britain had a trade surplus with India. Britain used this surplus to balance its trade deficits with other countries, that is, with countries from which Britain was importing more than it was selling to. Wartime transformations. The First World War was fought between the Allies, Britain, France and Russia, later joined by the US, and the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Ottoman Turkey. The war lasted for more than 4 years, which involved the world's leading industrial nations. Rise of mass production and consumption. The US economy recovered quicker and resumed its strong growth in the early 1920s. Mass production is one of the important features of the US economy, which began in the late 19th century. A well-known pioneer of mass production was the car manufacturer, Henry Ford. Also, many countries financed their investments through loans from the US. The withdrawal of the US loans affected much of the rest of the world. Unfortunately, the US banking system collapsed as thousands of banks went bankrupt and were forced to close. India and the Great Depression. India trade was severely affected by the Depression. The prices of agriculture fell sharply, but still, the colonial government refused to reduce revenue demands. Rebuilding a world economy, the post-war era. Second, lessons were drawn from interwar economic experience. Mass production cannot be sustained without mass communication. The Bretton Woods, it is the name of a hotel in the USA, conference established the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to deal with external surpluses and deficits of its member nations. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as the World Bank, was set up to finance post-war reconstruction. The IMF and the World Bank commenced financial operations in 1947. Conclusion. The making of the global world has a long history of trade, migration of people in search of work, the movement of capital, etc. Silk routes linked the world. The Silk routes linked together vast regions of Asia with Europe and Northern Africa. Thanks for watching. If you find this video helpful and informative, please share and hit the subscribe button.